A jacket that took 600 hours to make, worn by Naomi Campbell on a Paris runway, and later sold at Christie's for 382,000 euros. Not the dress, the jacket. And that jacket, every bead, every sequin, every stitch came from one address in Paris. An atelier that has been embroidering haute couture since before the Eiffel Tower existed. This is the story of Lesage. And once you understand what they actually do and how they do it, you will never look at a beaded gown the same way again. To understand Lesage, you have to go back to 1858, not to Lesage, to a man named Albert Michonet. Paris in 1858 was the fashion capital of the world. Napoleon III and Empress Eugénie were setting trends for courts across Europe, and somebody had to embroider all of those gowns. That somebody was Michonet. He founded his atelier that year, and his clients were immediately extraordinary. The imperial court, Paris theatre companies, and men named Charles Frederick Worth, who had just opened the very first haute couture house in history. So, from day one, Maison Michonet was stitched into the DNA of couture itself. Decades passed, the Belle Époque came and went. Worth was replaced by new names: Madeleine Vionnet, Jean Paquin, the Callot Sœurs, and Michonet embroidered for them too. His atelier supplied whoever was setting the standard. By the 1920s, Michonet was aging. The workshop was legendary, but it needed new hands, new energy, and that is where our story really begins. In 1924, a couple acquired the Michonet atelier and renamed it Albert Lesage et Cie. Albert Lesage had a background in international trade. He had been taken prisoner during World War I, ended up in Chicago, and spent years as the director of the women's clothing department at Marshall's Fields, one of the most famous department stores in America. So he understood fashion commercially, and he understood it globally. His wife, Marie-Louise, nicknamed Yo since her youth, when she used to sign her fashion sketches with that name, came from inside the couture world. She was the assistant in charge of embroidery at Madeleine Vionnet, one of the most technically demanding designers of the century. Vionet's bias-cut gowns were made from silk so fragile that the slightest wrong stitch would warp the entire drape. Marie-Louise knew exactly how embroidery had to behave to serve a gown rather than fight it. The two of them were, in a sense, a perfect combination, one who understood the market, one who understood the craft. The 1920s, the roaring 20s, were a moment of absolute excess and joy in fashion. Jazz, Art Deco, flapper dresses, beads everywhere. The demand for embellished gowns was enormous, and the Lesages responded with innovation. They took embroidery to a new level of efficiency. Although already present within the Parisian tradition, it was under the Lesages' leadership that the Lunéville hook technique became the method of choice. This tambour embroidery process allowed beads and sequins to be applied with a speed and precision impossible to achieve with a standard needle, transforming craftsmanship into pure industrial innovation. For anyone who doesn't know what Lunéville is, it is a hooked needle that works like a tiny crochet hook, creating a chain stitch from below the fabric while catching bead after bead in a continuous movement. The result is precise, fast, and the foundation of almost every beaded haute couture piece you have ever seen. If you want to learn this technique, the exact one that Lesage built their entire empire on, I have a beginner course opening soon. The waitlist link is in the description. But for now, let's get back to the story, because it's about to get very interesting. In early 1930s, the Great Depression hit. Fashion budget shrank. The atelier was struggling. And then Elsa Schiaparelli walked in. Schiaparelli was the great surrealist of fashion, a woman who put lobsters on dresses and telephones in handbags and treated the body as canvas for ideas. And she needed an embroidery house that wasn't afraid of anything. Lesage was the house. Together, they created embroideries that had never existed before: circus themes, zodiac signs, constellations picked out in beads, coral, and precious stones, gold thread in shapes that belonged to a dream rather than a dress. Albert Lesage experimented with materials that were genuinely strange: Murano glass flowers, imitation lapis lazuli and turquoise, crushed gelatin sequins to make them look like hammered coins, fish scales polished and applied to fabric to create a shifting, water-like surface, a technique known as galusha. This was no decoration, this was craft pushed to the level of art, and it saved the Atelier. Albert Lesage died in 1949. He was 61 years old. His son François was just 20. François had grown up in a pile of beads and sequins, as he later described it. He had inherited his mother's gift for color and his father's gift for drawing, and he had spent time in Hollywood embroidering for film productions before his father's death called him back to Paris. At 20, he took over one of the most important ateliers in haute couture, and over the next 6 decades, he built it into something that had no equal in the world. He worked with Christie and Dior, Cristobal Balenciaga, Hubert de Givenchy, Pierre Balmain, Jean-Louis Scherer, Christian Lacroix, names that are now in fashion history books. Christian Lacroix once said of François, "He is the one who gave me a taste for embroidery. He is my couture godfather." But his most legendary collaboration was with Yves Saint Laurent, a partnership that lasted 44 years. 44. They met in 1963, and from that moment, every season, Yves Saint Laurent brought Lesage his vision, and Lesage translated it into thread and sequin and bead. The most famous result, and the one that shows you exactly what this atelier was capable of, came in 1988. The Yves Saint Laurent Spring-Summer 1988 collection was a tribute to painting, specifically to Van Gogh. Saint Laurent created jackets inspired by Van Gogh's sunflowers and irises. The sunflowers jacket, yellow and orange, made from yellow organza, was embroidered entirely with glass beads, sequins, ribbons, and pearls. It took Lesage's embroiderers more than 600 hours to stitch by hand. Only 4 were ever made. The one shown on the runway was worn by Naomi Campbell. That jacket now lives in the Yves Saint Laurent Museum in Paris. And in November 2019, one of the other 4, a version made for a private client, went to auction at Christie's. It was estimated at 120,000 euros. It sold for 382,000 euros for a jacket. I want to put that in technical terms because luxury carries a different weight when you understand the craft. 600 hours represent approximately 15 weeks of full-time work for a single embroiderer. In real atelier setting, however, to meet couture deadlines, this massive workload is shared among a team of artisans working simultaneously. This is precisely where the technique becomes miraculous. Every member of the team must maintain the exact same tension and rhythm. If one embroiderer's hand is even slightly tighter than their colleagues, the different panels of the jacket will never align during assembly. It requires an absolute collective precision to ensure the finished piece appears as a single, fluid brushstroke. That is what Lesage was, and that is what the price was paying for. The collection also featured an irises jacket, blue and purple, equally extraordinary. A version of that jacket was later worn by Catherine Deneuve in a famous 1992 fashion shoot for French Elle in Marrakech. These two jackets are considered among the most iconic garments in fashion history. In 2002, François Lesage made a decision that surprised many people. He sold the Atelier to Chanel. He was 73. There was no obvious successor within the family, and he had seen too many of the great Parisian ateliers simply disappear, their knowledge gone with them, their archives scattered or lost. Chanel, through its subsidiary dedicated to artisan houses, offered something rare, the guarantee that the atelier would continue, that the embroiderers would keep their jobs, and that the archive would be preserved. That archive is the largest collection of artistic embroidery in the world, 75,000 samples. It features creations for Madeleine Vionnet, Elsa Schiaparelli, Yves Saint Laurent, Christian Lacroix, and every major couture house across a century of fashion. Today, Lesage embroiderers continue to create for Chanel, Valentino, Christian Dior, and the new talents in haute couture and luxury ready-to-wear. While the Atelier has moved from its historic home in the 9th arrondissement to the cutting-edge spaces of Le 19M, the essence of the work remains untouched. The hooks are still Lunéville. The chain stitch is still the same one Marie-Louise Lesage perfected in the 1920s. The hands change, the craft doesn't. In 1992, François Lesage did something else. He opened a school, École Lesage, because he understood that the greatest threat to haute couture embroidery wasn't money, it was the disappearance of people who knew how to do it. The school teaches the techniques that define Lesage's work: Lunéville crochet, gold work, beadwork, three-dimensional embroidery. It offers courses for beginners and advanced embroiderers alike, and its graduates work in the ateliers of the major fashion houses. I trained at École Lesage, and I want to say something directly to anyone watching this who feels drawn to this craft. What they teach there is not mysterious, it is learnable. It is a physical skill that anyone with patience and the right guidance can acquire. The techniques that produce the Van Gogh jacket, the Lunéville hook, the chain stitch, the logic of working from the wrong side of the fabric, these are things you can learn. I have been teaching Lunéville embroidery and haute couture techniques for years, and I built my school specifically because I believe this knowledge should not be locked behind the doors of a Parisian ateliers. If you want to learn Lunéville embroidery, the same technique that Lesage built an empire on, I have a beginner course opening soon. The link is in the description and in my bio. Come join the waitlist. And if you enjoyed this video, subscribe. The next one goes even deeper into the techniques behind the most iconic couture pieces ever made. This is what haute couture is made of. Not just the designer's name on the label, but 600 hours of someone's hands in an atelier on a Paris side street with a hook the size of a pen. That's the real story.